Erin is here with today's newspapers. Erin, you're starting with a story that we started with the bulletin talking to Benedict with half an hour ago, actually. This is coronavirus restrictions in the UK coming into force. They're drawing some sharp criticisms, aren't they, of the government?
That's right, Stuart. It's the cover of most British papers this morning. As the Daily Mirror points out in its headline, some 10 million British citizens are now under some form of lockdown or have some form of new restrictions applied to them. This after Northeast England became the latest area to be slapped with new rules, including 10 p.m. curfews. Now, the paper notes that there are now more than 30 different regions with various restrictions. All of them have one thing in common, which is that you can't meet with people outside of your family or quote-unquote inner bubble circle in any private home or garden. Now, that said, critics say the multiplication of these different rules in different areas is increasingly hard to follow, increasingly confusing, which, according to the Daily Mirror, makes it more likely that there will be a second wave. Now, there's a cartoon from the Telegraph this morning, I think, that kind of builds on these criticisms, saying that instead of imposing localized lockdown measures to avoid economic problems, having localized measures instead of a national one is kind of incoherent. I will impose as many lockdowns as it takes to avoid another disastrous national lockdown. Well, you can see that the map is just full of several different locks instead of one big lock. Yeah. Of course, not sure how much of a difference that makes. So similar views from The Guardian to end on that, which is that the government needs to both revisit its lockdown and testing strategy. The head of the testing strategy is quoted in this article as saying not only is demand for tests up by 4 times what they can handle, but also that 90% of tests fail to meet the 24-hour turnaround, which obviously makes it difficult to track and trace.
Let's move away from coronavirus completely for this next story. This is a piece by a French paper shedding new light on Beijing's crackdown. This is on the Uyghur minority.
That's right. Le Monde is the paper that published a vast new investigative piece on Chinese surveillance of the Uyghur minority, the Muslim minority, which, according to the paper, now penetrates even the most intimate aspects of their lives. The piece revealing that Chinese authorities forced Uyghur families to accept officials that I think are quite cynically referred to as cousins into their homes. Now, these cousins are, of course, individuals that are appointed by the Chinese government and are, of course, of the Han majority ethnic majority, if you will, and they essentially live with the Uyghur families for days or even weeks at a time. They're responsible for making sure that these families don't show any signs of radicalization or any resistance to the Chinese policy on the Uyghur minority, and of course reporting any suspicious behavior. Now, the cousins also reportedly submit these families to rather cynical tests. Among one of the tests cited in the piece is having them all cook meat pastries together without specifying what meat it is to see if the Uyghurs ask whether or not it's pork. Of course, observant Muslims don't eat pork. So the paper points out that this is just the latest example of Beijing's crackdown on the Uyghur minority. Comes in addition to the surveillance cameras, the informants in Uyghur mosques and schools, and of course the infamous detention centers that at least 1 million of them have been forced to stay in.
Yeah, very disturbing report. Let's change gear for a story out of France. This is where lawmakers have stormed out a parliamentary hearing on Thursday here.
That's right, Stuart. At a roundtable event held at the National Assembly yesterday, hosting student unions and associations, several Republicans, so right-wing Republican Party lawmakers, as well as one lawmaker from the ruling party, there she is, stormed out of a meeting because a student wearing the Muslim hijab was present in the room. The lawmakers described the student's wearing of the hijab as a political and communitarian or separatist act, an infringement on French rules on the separation between church and state, laïcité, saying that it goes against the values of the French Republic. Now, as the Parisien points out in a different piece on the matter, there are actually no rules that justify these lawmakers' decision yesterday to step out of the room. The National Assembly's rules do prohibit lawmakers or public servants in parliamentary sessions from wearing any obvious signs of religious belonging. That said, they do not prevent the wearing of religious symbols for people who are either simply sitting in the audience or invited to testify, which was the case for the woman who was wearing the hijab yesterday. Now, the ruling lawmaker is nonetheless quoted in this Parisien piece saying that those rules don't change anything for her. I quote, "The wearing of the hijab in the context of our work is incompatible with my values concerning the relations between men and women and the ideals I have about the institution."
A debate which goes on here in France very regularly. Finally, from Erin, an American company has made a pretty tempting offer to its employees. This is to cut down on costs.
That's right. It's an offer I'm sure many won't be able to refuse, Stuart. According to Forbes, the American company Stripe, a tech company, is offering its employees a $20,000 bonus to move out of San Francisco, Seattle, and New York to relocate to less expensive cities. The timing is ripe, according to the company, which wants to take advantage of the fact that with the coronavirus pandemic, an increasing number of employees are working from home and are also kind of seeking greener pastures, literally elsewhere, a little bit more nature to get out of the noise and the grit of the big cities. But when things, of course, seem too good to be true, they usually are. Of course, this offer comes with a catch, which is that those who accept the deal will have to take a 10% pay cut. Unclear how that'll kind of add up over time, whether or not it's advantageous if you're living in a still relatively expensive city. Of course, in the long term, maybe not such a good idea.
Depends exactly where you're being asked to go, I suppose.
Yes.
Interesting. All right, thank you very much, Erin. Erin Ogunke with the newspapers on France 24.